Hello, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Navid Khonsari, and I totally falsified that Time magazine. I actually just made it at Kinko's, but, you know, whatever I can do to fill seats, right? So I'm here to talk to you about bringing real stories to game, and in particular, a case study of 1979. But before I kind of roll into all that, let me tell you a little something about myself. All right, so I was born in, really quite quickly. I grew up in Iran. Revolution took place, which displaced me and my family. We wound up in Canada. I wound up going many years later to college. I studied actually history, which is funny how it's coming to bite me in the ass now. And from there, I went on to actually go to film school, graduated from film school, and made my first film. And that's probably where I got my first great lesson, which is I busted my ass. I mean, raising the money, making this, and in the end, while we were able to sell the film, I wasn't really happy with the final product. And I think that gave me one of my learning lessons, which is if you're going to do something, you have to go fully into it with your heart, because it's not really worth it. No matter how much money you make, it's never going to come out to the number of hours and how much of yourself you put into it. So fortunately enough, I wind up in New York City. I wind up meeting the guys from Rockstar Games, and these are the guys that are actually doing this. These are the guys that have this high bar for their standard. Perfection is the name of the game, and nailing the ball out of the park is what it's all about, and no compromising. So it was just so satisfying to be involved with this group, and I was a cinematic director there, and went on to also head up the production team, and it was just a phenomenal experience, and really I learned so much out of it as a storyteller, as a creative, as a game designer. Not that I'm actually a game designer, but learning about how all these teams are working together, and just the overall way of how a game comes to fruition. I left Rockstar and went up started my own studio. It's called Ink Stories, and we're based out of New York City. Partnered up with my wife, who's a documentary filmmaker. And as a result of that, we wind up doing a couple of feature documentaries, in particular Pulling John and Pandemonium, which you can check out on Netflix. And we've also done a couple of graphic novels, in particular Bedouin. I did wind up working with some other teams like Remedy. I worked on Alan Wake, and with THQ I worked on Homefront. So we were kind of making games, graphic novels, documentaries, and really that's kind of led to where I am today with 1979 and what we're trying to kind of pull off with our game. So let's just get everything out, right? So the big question is why? Like, what the hell am I thinking? First of all, making a game about history is possibly the worst idea. These are all the things that came at me. It's too touchy a subject. It can't be done. Who cares? It's a bad idea. You know, will these people get mad? Is this anti-American? I mean, it was all over the map about why this shouldn't happen, why we shouldn't make games about real life, real stories. And the best one for me was games are meant to be fun and frivolous. And that really brings me to my next segment, really. So let's talk about this. Video games are the biggest sector in entertainment, right? They're the most engaging form of entertainment that we have. And we don't think that we should really evolve to a medium that embraces real stories? Really? Okay, so video games have rocked our world, from pissed off birds to savvy gangsters to guys making life and death choices in a zombie world. And we're worried about a few Iranians standing on the front lines of democracy, pissed off and savvy and trying to make life and death decisions? Really? And finally, nobody could say it better. Mark Twain said, "Truth is stranger than fiction." Because fiction is obliged to stick to possibilities that truth isn't. Do we really want to make games be limited to possibilities that are only coming through fiction? Really? So those are my three little realies that we've gone into. And what I want to talk to you about is where we're really at with gaming. Now, we can take a look at all the great-looking animation. I mean, it's on par with any kind of movies, visual effects in Hollywood. We can talk about the big budgets that are being spent, upwards of $250 million. But the truth is, gaming is still in its infancy stage. It's still kind of growing. If we were to make a comparison to film, we're kind of going from black and white to color. We've got a whole area, a whole arena to be able to evolve into. So, what is the next evolution in gaming? In my opinion, and what we're coining at Ink Stories, it's called Verite Games. Verite gets its names from documentaries. And really at the heart of it, what it means is like, can you capture that truthful moment, that realistic moment without manipulating it from the outside world? It's that moment where you see in documentaries or in films where that person actually has a self-realization, where they realize that what just came out of their mouth was happening right there, that was a part of their thought pattern. And I think if we can kind of get that, and if we can actually make that a part of a game, we're going to be taking engagement to a whole new level. Now, when it comes to historical elements, historical games, historical stories, the one thing that kind of stands out is, how do you preserve the truth? And my goal isn't to try to preserve an actual document which says, on this day, this happened, and this person kind of did it. It's about preserving the larger truth. What took place during that moment? What's the story of the people during that time? And when it comes to, for example, if you take a look at, if you take a look at what took place with slavery, do we really want to know, or do we really want to engage with the dates of the Emancipation Proclamation? Or are we much more interested about the journey of a black man from the South trying to make his way up to the North and the characters that he comes up with and the hardships that he has to kind of deal with? Which one's going to be more engaging, and which one's actually going to initiate talk about that event? So let's also be truthful. There's been a number of games that have flirted with history. You can argue Assassin's Creed, for example, Medal of Honor, and basically any game based on the Roman Empire. And what have they all kind of maybe fallen short of? And I would say really three sectors. One is accuracy, one is realism, and one is gameplay. So let's start off with accuracy. While they draw from what that environment might look like or what the characters should actually be dressed in, the timeline is so out of whack that it actually doesn't sync up. So as a result, you've got historical influences, but without actually a historical story or without a historical timeline. The other part is realism. Do we really want to create characters that are like these superheroes or have like these massive amount of strengths that can kind of pop up in a world that we're trying to define as being true? I think part of the reason we've gone down that path is because we believe that that's what's going to get people excited. That's what's going to keep players engaged. It really is almost equates to action. It equates to adventure. But I would argue that if the goal is to provide excitement, there's something to be said about suspense. There's something to be said about trying to avoid being in danger. There's something about how you actually navigate a city or a country that's under martial law. So it's really a matter of perspective. And then also the tools and the weapons. A lot of people have come up to me about 1979. The first thing they're thinking, revolution, Iran, hostages. They're like, oh, this is going to be a first-person shooter. And the first thing I say is, actually, there's no shooting in the game at all. And it kind of throws people off a bit. But the reason there's no shooting in the game isn't because I actually have any kind of moral stance on it. I mean, I worked on Manhunt, and I've worked on some pretty serious hardcore games. And the reason for that there isn't was because there wasn't guns at the time. The whole situation in that country was you couldn't buy a weapon. The people took to the streets. It was a protest. It was about people coming together trying to make a change. And what did actually change was when they were able to break into the military barracks, only at the end to get access to the weapons. So it wasn't in the real world that I'm trying to convey, and so as a result, I don't need it in this one. And I think that in general, we're so focused on action-adventure that if you take a look at most of the games, we have like a plethora of different types of weapons. But really, all that's kind of doing is limiting the story. I actually would argue that by trying to going back to the Mark Twain comment, you're actually limiting your game, you're limiting your story by trying to stay true to the fictitious world. Actually trying to use history or what took place and trying to emulate that provides you not only with these great, great examples, but actually gives you a goal to try to replicate that or actually try to make it as true to form as possible. And finally, the one that actually means the most, because I know we're here on a narrative summit, but no matter what we say, it's all about gameplay. If you don't get the gameplay right, nobody's going to actually care about the narrative. Especially no one's going to care about something that took place on the other side of the world, which not that many people are familiar with from 35 years ago, or any other time or any other century. But the main thing is, and this is kind of the experience that I got working with my group and my development team, was that the initial way we approached it was, well, what's the main game mechanic? Is this going to be a shooter? Is this going to be a platformer? Is this going to be a puzzle? What's it going to be? And my argument is that the main focus for 1979 and the main focus at Ink Stories, our main game mechanic is narrative. Narrative should determine what the game is going to be, what the story is going to be, and then we build gameplay around that. And the gameplay doesn't have to be this one-off. This continual thought pattern that we have to have a game which has 80% first-person shooter throughout all of it and just make that one thing really, really good works. And it's great for a lot of games, but it doesn't have to be the universal rule. The universal rule when it comes to narrative-focused games is make a great story and then build around that. Let that be the skeleton of what you're creating. So what's 1979 Revolution about? Well, it's actually a story about a young man named Reza who is out on the streets of Tehran, and he has absolutely no political interest. He's much more of like a shit disturber, wanting to be out on the streets. He wants to kind of feel the vibe. He believes in the possibility of change, but he really doesn't care about how the change comes about. Unfortunately, the events of Black Friday take place, which was actually shootings that took place on the protesting, the nonviolent protesting crowd, and at that point, Reza's attitude changes, and he decides to become a part of the revolution, and eventually he becomes a revolutionary hero. But exactly like what took place in history, many of the people that were considered the heroes of the revolution were then considered enemy of the state when Khomeini came into power. And this trajectory that I just kind of explained to you is also a trajectory for somebody who doesn't know anything about this revolution or any other revolutions can kind of go along that and learn, because the main character, Reza, is also making that same journey. They're going through the same arc as the player. So 1979 is basically similar to a lot of games that have done quite well recently in terms of their template. We're doing this as an episodic game. We provide 3 episodes per season with the goal of putting 3 seasons out. We are actually providing our cinematics as a graphic novel, and we plan on breaking the graphic novel out to the sides and delivering it to players and readers with a 30% more additional information and more story aside from the game. Finally, the way that we've been going about making this game, aside from the game dynamics, has been how you go about making a documentary. Research, interviews, going through books, reading biographies. But in particular, the interviews is something that we plan on putting together with the actual gameplay footage, merging them together and creating an animated documentary that's kind of going to go along with all this. So those are really the breakdown of what we're trying to kind of do. Now, I want to go back to what we're talking about, which is narrative determines the gameplay. So in our narrative, at the beginning and throughout all of it, we have this continual emotional engagement. We have areas where you kind of have this story kind of spill out. But we also want you to understand and learn and discover Iran, discover what it takes to actually start a revolution, how to survive a revolution, how to make a Molotov cocktail, how to make on the fly a gas mask to protect you from tear gas. How many people here know that if you actually take lemons and you squeeze it under your eyes, it stops your eyes from tearing from tear gas? I mean, this is the kind of research that we've done from like anti-riot pamphlets that we've read, from stuff that we researched taking place in Egypt. We put this all together, and this has allowed us to not only provide elements of the game that's exploration, which you're all familiar with, elements where you try to avoid getting arrested, which is going to lead to a stealth level, but then we actually bring in real-world elements, such as photos and cassettes, recordings from that time, and people can compare them side by side. Now, what does this actually do? Aside from it being a fancier collectible, what it's doing is it's subtextually actually bringing that content and making it real. When you can actually see that real animated world and that real animated picture side by side, it just takes it to a new level. When you can hear recordings of these political figures, whether it's the Shah or whether it's Khomeini, you're actually then bringing legitimacy to the material that you're creating. Now, like The Walking Dead has proven via Telltale, the critical decision path is a great one to get people further and more emotionally engaged. And that's what we're doing here. We're bringing people into that with these decisions that they're making. But through these decisions, if you take a look at them, it's not really about where the storyline splits off. It's about how you put your own morality and your own personality on that character. And hopefully the decisions that you make actually wind up enlightening you about the world that's taking place. Not just, I helped this person and I didn't help this person. It's a much greater picture. It's actually all the questions that lead up to that final moment that fill out that world in terms of a story. So we've got, finally, the thing which we want to do is we want to create a game that works on the tablet and on the mobile in terms of a touch screen, but recognizing that we also have a huge, huge foothold in the PC market. But it's going to look pretty crummy trying to take a tablet game over to the PC world. So we've done all our animation, all our production value at the PC console level, and we're going to bring that down to the tablet and mobile phone, and yet we're going to take what's great about tablets and mobile phones, which is the magic of the touchscreen, design it for that, and then we're going to bring that up towards the PC and basically port it over that way. So there was three things that we talked about. One was accuracy, one was realism, and the other one was gameplay, and how all three of these kind of need to come into play rather than just a singular focus. So I want to show you something about accuracy, and I want to let this little video clip play from the gameplay, and then I'll just kind of discuss it. And so what you're actually seeing is a full replicated version of what took place on Black Friday. The streets, the cars, the clothes of the people, everything that you see is taking place exactly to that. And there's value to that in terms of the end user, the player will appreciate actually having you go into that extra effort. And then finally, one of the mini games that we have is you taking pictures. You're allowed to take 24 pictures throughout the game. And as you can see here, you can actually go to your collectibles and see the real life picture right beside it. That perfect comparison of what is taking place in your game and what took place in the real world. And again, this might not mean a lot to everybody, but you have to recognize that if you go to the ends of the world to give the player details, if you try to put your bar and your standard higher than anything else, they're appreciative and they'll come back more and more and they'll be forgiving of areas that at least you tried. And you're trying with this genre, you're trying a whole new evolution. So you have to make sure that you push it. The next thing I want to talk to you about is gameplay. You know, I've been kind of hacking on like you shouldn't just go with one. So we've got the area where you take a picture in one area. We've got another part of the game where all you have to do is navigate through a protest, trying to get to the front of the crowd. And then when you get to the front, the protest goes all crazy, and you have to navigate this crowd that's going kind of in and out, and you have to go right back through it. We've got elements where you make a Molotov cocktail and you throw it. We've got elements where you're on a rooftop and you try to help your friends navigate through the military. And then this is another one. This is something that also brings in something that game designers are not really big on, which is if you're going to give me a challenge, make sure that I can succeed at it. And my argument is that if you're replicating real world, success is not always a part of the real world. But if you do everything right, you can fulfill that need for the gamer, thinking that they've done what they needed to do. And then you emotionally draw them in by actually letting that character maybe not survive. So let me just quickly show you this as well.
Reza! What do we do? What do you want? Unbutton his shirt. Tone bar. Okay. Okay. Wipe away the blood so I can see the wound.
Quite simply, this is the leader of the revolution. He's been shot. And what we're doing is we're just, a little bit of trauma. We're opening up the shirt. We're trying to figure out what it is. We wipe away the blood. We find the wound, which is right.
Okay, is this good? Good. Khube, it doesn't look that serious.
It doesn't look that bad. It's a bullet wound over his heart. It's not really getting into technical perfection here. So then you got to cover it in terms of making sure that the blood doesn't kind of come out.
Babak, what's happening? Open up the rest of his shirt. Hey, boy, look at all that food, boy.
And this is where we start realizing that we've fixed him as best as we can. We've opened up the shirt, and now he's got actually bullet wounds to his stomach.
Just talk to him.
And we know that there's just no way of coming back. And this is my cousin that I'm related to. So now I've done everything that the game required me to do. There is no failure in what I've done. but there's a failure that's emotionally pulling me in because in the end, I did everything that I could and my cousin still died. And that is something that's truly tangible, not only to real world, but actually emotionally bringing you in. So the other thing I wanted to talk to you guys about was the realism aspect. And realism is exactly what I just kind of said, which is the continuation of you do something, but then what are the repercussions? And that realism is what brings you in emotionally as well. And that realism, when you'll see in this graphic novel element, this cutscene.
Don't be done, Ali, you're gonna be okay.
No,
Ali,
I'm not.
Ali.
It's okay, Research. I read it happen here on the street. Some dark hole in prison. You're right about this. Okay, tell people what happened.
I will, Ali, I will. I'll write all about it. I'm so sorry, Reza John. I'm so sorry. Ali.
So there's a lot more, but I'm running out of time and I want to make sure I get to the end of this. But basically, like what we've done here is we've provided you with the gameplay and everything that you see here, everything in terms of what took place, the suffering that took place, the clothes that these people are wearing, the street, the actual fauna on the trees. A lot of games do this, so I'm not saying that they don't do this, but all of it is there, and we're capturing that realism combined with emotion. So the process, really quite simply, I touched on this and I want to be kind of quick about it. You have to be passionate about the idea. This is how documentaries start. You get an idea and you follow it through. The next step is you got to research. Interviews are great. Try to reach out to anybody that you can just initially start the conversation. Books, research. Just so everybody knows, this is the exact same process that we also used when we were doing the Grand Theft Auto and any of the other games that we did at Rockstar Games. It was about research. It was about nailing down the details. Story development, historical accuracies that you must stay true to. Decide which ones those are going to be. You're not going to be able to cover all of them. Choose what's the most important part of that history and then build around it. In the end, and this is really important, you are making a fictitious story about a real world. You're trying to tell the stories of all the people, not just one person, but you're actually telling it through one person that interacts with all the people. So if you don't get the gameplay right, it doesn't make a difference. I can't reiterate this enough. You're dead in the water. And look, finally, this is the thing to take to play, because you can get criticized till the cows come home, which is basically, I am not, an accountant of truth. I'm basically just there to kind of convey the more overall global truth. And that's the goal with what we're trying to do. And finally, thanks very much for the Time magazine piece. This is the piece that kind of came out. If you pick it up this week, you could kind of check it out. I'm not putting this out there so I can kind of flex. I'm putting this out there so I can encourage all of you to recognize that this isn't just me, but this is an evolution that's coming. This is an evolution that needs people to join it. And more importantly, it's being legitimized by people who want to see that, the end user, the players. So thank you very much.